I feel like I know most of you. So, like, does anyone here not know the BaraBariBall? Has anyone not played it? Okay, cool. Well, I'll show you what it's about later. But I guess I probably won't dwell on that too long right now. So, I guess so. Yeah, my name is Noah Sasso, game designer here in New York. I kind of started to write this talk, and it kind of went into this weird like other direction that wasn't so much about my game. So I'm just going to go with it and maybe talk about kind of like what I think about when I'm like making games and kind of about my background instead. And then afterwards, then we'll talk about the game and maybe play, and I'll talk to Andy and all that. So like I basically have always like really liked making stuff like comics, and oh wait, I made this little. So I was like making stuff. Like I used to make stupid little comics when I was a kid, and got into making music when I was in school and recorded a bunch of albums with friends and kind of performed in places and had a lot of fun doing that. But eventually, like I realized I probably wasn't gonna be able to support myself making music, and it was true. I was kind of living in Pittsburgh in a squad and wasn't really going anywhere. So I decided to get into games. Like I got a job programming PHP kind of out of nowhere with like very little experience. Kind of spent a year working on a project that's probably surprisingly simple to any real programmers, but I learned a lot. And after like composing music for so long, it felt like really like objective, like as opposed to being, I'd never know when I'm done with a song. I just kind of like slave over it, and then eventually it's got to be finished, so I finish it. But when you're programming something, it's like it works now, and you can make it more elegant and you can tune it, but there's a point at which it does the thing it needs to do. And like that, for me at that time, was like really kind of awesome and kind of like, I don't know, it was different. It was refreshing. So after that, I picked up Game Maker. I had this opportunity to make this prototype for this Nintendo DS game. This is back when the DS was a new thing. So I made this game. It's called turned into this game called Miracle Adventures. Didn't make it onto the DS, but it was a lot of fun. It's kind of like a shoot 'em up where you're using the mouse to manipulate bullets, and kind of everything's very chaotic and kind of improvisational. Like it's instead of like memorization, if that's a word, like which is what most shoot 'em ups are kind of about, like memorizing patterns. In this one, it's like every time you play it, the input is like so diverse that it's kind of completely chaotic, and you can't really predict what's going to happen all the time. And then I moved to New York and got a job working at a company called This Is Pop. I made a bunch of these games on Adult Swim and Cartoon Network. It's like a very client-based company, and a lot of short projects that are pretty fun, and there's always something new to work on. And so since then I've just been making games and teaching for 5 or 6 years, I guess, and including BaraBariBall, which is the reason I'm here, which we'll talk about later. But so as part of this tech talk, I wanted to put together like a little arcade of some of these games, and other games I've worked on, as well as BaraBariBall, obviously. And so I'm not usually like very introspective, but compiling all this old stuff like made me think about a kind of a common thread that's kind of between the games and music that I enjoy and make, and like also between like the fields of game design and music themselves. So I kind of wanted to talk about that a little bit. I guess because of my background, I think of games, especially like real-time games and multiplayer games, as really similar to music, like particularly instrumental music, which is what I'd like to compose. They both have this like kind of sense of like universality and timelessness that I think is like really powerful and unique. Like they're kind of both. So I was lucky enough to have this like appreciation for classical music drilled into me when I was like 19 or 20, which I think is rare and was kind of painful at the time, but I actually really appreciate now. And like it was really like a surprise, like that a composition written by someone who had died 100 years before I was born, and like lived in a country thousands of miles away from where I live, grew up in a completely different circumstance, could make something that's like so affecting. Like even now, it's like, how is it that melodies and rhythm can have this like weird universality that transcends like culture and time? And especially considering that we're talking about like instrumental music without any lyrics or like explicit references to themes like the human condition, like morality and sorrow and revenge. So it suggests that there's like something innate about music, like something that is kind of like universal about it rather than learned. And there's like this similar universality when we talk about like older, like certain kinds of games, like card games or games like chess and Go, like games that have been played for longer than recorded history. There's a mod, like that's an awesome bottom there. That's an awesome statue of three people playing mahjong in China. So just like we still care about gamelan music and like Bach and Debussy, like we still think that these old games are important, and we still play them because we like to, like not because we want to just like learn about history. They still appeal to all sorts of people with all sorts of different backgrounds. So that's pretty cool. But like this kind of timelessness obviously isn't unique to music and games. Like people still appreciate all kinds of art from distant lands or antiquity. But I think like music and games have this other thing in common that's kind of related to that, in that they both kind of contain this element of discovery, or like this element of like exploration of the real. And so when I say like discovery or exploration, I don't mean mapping, like in the sense of navigating a virtual space, like in Minecraft or Skyrim, or even like interpreting the themes of like message in a work. Instead, I mean like when you're listening to a piece of music or playing a game, you're engaging with a thing that is actually constructed from elements of the real, like objective, verifiable world in a way that other forms like literature or film are not. So in the case of music, I'm talking about the notes, like that are the building blocks of all melody and harmony, like the frequencies that are made up of the notes. And so we can do a very quick 30-second. Did that disappear for you too? No. Very quick 30-second like acoustic theory lesson. So what we call a note is actually a frequency, which is like a rate of change of air pressure that our ears interpret as a specific pitch. And there's this special relationship between two notes called an octave, where the latter is like twice the frequency of the former. And our ears recognize this interval, and like we perceive it in a unique way. Like the notes sound the same in this kind of undescribable way. It's just like they just sound like these are the same notes. One is higher and the other is lower. And it's not just our ears. It's like nearly every culture recognizes the octave, and they all organize their musical systems around it, with like a few exceptions, but very, very few. Different cultures do like subdivide the octave. Like when we say like music notes like C, D, E, F, G. Those are all like different subdivisions of the octave, and different cultures do like make those choices in different ways sometimes, but they're always within this same kind of 2-to-1 relationship, where one note is twice the frequency of another. So this video doesn't directly talk about the octave, but it is just kind of a cool way to visualize, if you're not familiar with how notes are generated, this kind of vibration of these strings. Oops. So that's pretty cool. I mean, that's not like modified or anything. This is just the camera inside of a guitar. But we don't have to listen to this whole thing. It's kind of corny. But, so like this idea that like this relationship like of 2-to-1 that forms this thing that we perceive as being similar, and we can't really describe why. It's not like a matter of artistic intent or like reader interpretation or like even the result of cultural assimilation, but it's still at the core of like every culture like around the world, which is kind of awesome. And that's why people say that there's this common phrase that like music is the universal language, and I think there's like a weird kind of truth to that. Like maybe if aliens actually came to Earth and the part of space that they came from has like the same physical properties of where we live, like they might actually learn to like our music if they spend a year studying it, which is kind of a cool thing to think about. So in one sense, this is really obvious, right? Like people probably aren't that different from one another, regardless of where like we were born or what we learned when we grew up. We're all pretty much made of the same stuff, and we have similar ears and we got similar brains. But actually, cases where we don't have similar ears is like super interesting to me. Like the idea that some cultures have a much higher like frequency of people that have perfect pitch, which is where you can just hear a note and you'd be like, oh, that sounds like an A sharp, and it is. Like there's just certain people who can just nail that, and it's like interesting. Like in cultures that have like a tonal language, like Mandarin it's very common, but not very common, but much more so than it is here. So that's just kind of an interesting side note, but So yeah, so in one sense, it's really obvious. Like people aren't that different. Of course, like you'll like music that other cultures make. It's no big deal. But in another sense, there's also something like really kind of appealing to me and like kind of profound about how the building blocks of music have this connection to these fundamental properties of reality. About like it's like about how vibrations work and how they bend and how their speed changes and how they multiply one another, and how like the art form that's maybe the most abstract is like also probably like the most physical and like the most moving to me at least. Like I like that there's this aspect of music that's not representational, and that is made of stuff that kind of exists outside of our opinions or awareness of it. Like I feel like the fact that music doesn't rely so heavily on representation is maybe why it's so like visceral. But in the same sense, I went a little bit ahead of myself here. But in the same sense, the building blocks of music are like kind of tangible and physical. Like games are built from stuff that's just as real, in a sense. Like, so if we say science is like a systematic study of the structure of the physical and natural world. And it's interesting that players like act like scientists, even when they're like playing a game they don't understand yet. Like in this slide, this woman is figuring out what happens when you press the button, and like, oh, it makes Mario jump, and that's cool. So we press it again, and he'll still jump. And what happens if you knock down a bunch of enemies in a row? And I'm talking about that, the Mario kicking the turtle shell, and each one being worth a little more points than the last. It's like, oh, so now you got a lot of points, and then you get a one-up. That's great. I mean, what if you organize all the pieces of the game in a way where you don't even have to jump, and you just keep on bouncing? You get a lot of one-ups. Like that's like an act of science that someone figured out something about this system, and it made this verifiable response. Does anyone not know what's happening in this picture, by the way? Okay, good. So yeah, it's like this part of this like usually unconscious process, but like repeatable and process of the player testing and like pushing the system and like poking it and seeing how it responds and uncovering these repeatable truths about the rules like that make up the game world. And gradually in games that involve more complicated and more interesting systems that are maybe more opaque, players act in ways that more clearly represent what we think of as science generally, like World of Warcraft here. I don't really play World of Warcraft, so I'm not exactly sure what's happening here, but it's I think some kind of chart of how to deal damage over time. And then Street Fighter on the bottom, it's like frame data for Guile. So the point that I'm trying to make is like the same way that the note A is produced when like a medium vibrates at 440 hertz, like rules are not fiction. Rules like do determine the possibilities within a system, and there's something like in a similar way, it's like concrete and part of reality, which is really interesting. And yet Jesper Juul's book Half-Life, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with, puts forward like a similar idea that games are one part reality, in that the player is actually performing actions, and another part fiction, and the game elements have like a skin and a representation. And Raf Koster made like a very notorious analogy about how he suggested this horrific version of Tetris, where you basically take the same rules of Tetris and you reskin them to put the player in the role of a mass murderer stacking corpses. And I don't disagree with him. I think so. His point here is that that's actually not Tetris. He's arguing the opposite point, that what you produced is something that people wouldn't want to play. It doesn't have the essence of Tetris. But I don't disagree that the representation in Tetris in any game is like incredibly important, especially from the player point of view or the critic point of view. But I disagree that his thought experiment doesn't produce Tetris. I think that the essence of Tetris is still captured in that sick thought experiment. So I tried to make a less manipulative analogy with Super Mario Brothers again. So this is Super Mario Brothers. This is like a reskinned Super Mario Brothers where the shapes and sizes of all the elements are intact, as well as their behaviors. But since this is just a screenshot, you'll have to take my word for that. And yeah, so it would take some getting used to perceive that blue triangle as like a fire flower, and the orange rectangle is monsters, and the green one is Mario. But once you get used to it, everything you know about the original game would still hold true, as opposed to this, where we just made some of the monsters bigger, but left the skin on top.
Is Super Mario Brothers 3?
No, this is Mario Brothers 1, but I don't know what level it is. But so if any of us were to play either of these games, I think it's obvious that like your experiences would probably be more beneficial in this version rather than this one. And this guy, this is Andrew Garnicus, the speedrunner who currently holds the world record for the quickest complete game of Super Mario Brothers, which is like slightly under 5 minutes. He could probably repeat that performance in this, but if you were to play this, you would have to have an entirely different strategy. Now this is a performance of a Chopin piece by Vladimir Horowitz, a very famous pianist. Oh wait, we have to watch an ad. Sorry. We don't have to listen to it though. Okay. Let's listen to this for a second. Probably. Oh, thanks. There's a weird buzzing now. Okay, so it's a very nice piece. Now this is basically the same piece. So that super corny like MIDI version of the same piece, I don't like it, and I think listening to it would be missing the point. But I still kind of feel like, in a sense, that the essence of that composition is intact. Obviously, it's much lesser, like for the lack of Horowitz's sensitivity and empathy and his decades of training. But in the same way that I think the essence of Tetris and Super Mario Brothers is intact in those weird thought experiments, the essence, like the pieces that kind of create this objective, universal, like experience when you listen to that composition are still there. They're not there in the same way, and I don't recommend listening to them or playing that abstract Mario Brothers. But there is that same core. So that's kind of what I mean when I say that music and games have this objective, universal quality. I guess I'm talking about how the relationship between the players in the game can create these interesting and like surprising and unpredictable, but verifiable and repeatable real world events. Like in multiplayer games, like when a goal is reached, the outcome determined by the actions of each player is not like interpretation. Like I can't decide that I won chess even if you beat me, and I can't decide that you beat. You can't get the same thing with Street Fighter. It's like we've agreed to play during certain rules, and the outcome is kind of independent of either player. But obviously both players are equally important to making it come to be. Like when a speedrunner like Alexander discovers a technique for shaving off a couple seconds from the previously recorded best time of Super Mario Brothers, like he's really found like a unique phenomenon, and he's really like acted on it. Like he's found a way to bend the rules of the game into his favor. And he discovers something new that's always been there, but nobody knew about it and nobody exploited it. Like even the simple act of rolling a dice like this is kind of like taking a snapshot of a little moment in time and like examining the properties of a tiny piece of the world. And so to me, like this process of resolving uncertainty and discovering things about the objective reality of a game is part of what makes like games and music so special. And it's like part of a lot of the most interesting games to me, and especially when the process goes on for a very long time. So of course, just like that sterile MIDI rendition of Chopin is missing the point. Games also are not only about rules, and I'm not claiming some kind of like formal hierarchy where rules are the most important thing ever. I think we'd be much worse in a world where all games were completely abstract, obviously, or a world where we're surrounded by rich, complicated, emergent games that nobody wants to play or cares to play. That's just as pointless as not having them in the first place. But so yeah, that's the best way I've found to articulate, I guess, what I like about games at the moment, and what I probably due to my background. They have this like special connection to something that I feel is like real. They're like these little machines that churn up and like translate players' intentions and confirm or deny expectations. And so yeah, I like games that are like so finely crafted that it'll like always like seem possible to squeeze out a little bit better performance, or games that give players like enough versatility to support years of people just banging on them, like rigorously competing and like testing and kind of churning through all the possibilities. Or even just games where like the discovery of the truths about the system in the real world is not immediately trivial. Yeah, so like again, like I'm not trying to say, well, I guess I am trying to say that games and music are better than other art forms. I do believe that. I think they're the best. But I'm not trying to say the games and music that I'm talking about are more legit or more important than anything. I'm just trying to explain like what I like in the best way that I can so far. I think it's like a mode of creation. Like I kind of like focus on the work rather than like the work and its properties, rather than like the work and its culture or context, or the work and the creator, or the work and a message. And yeah, I kind of feel like that's about all I have. I guess I feel like you see kind of reflections of this in other art forms too, though. I guess just as kind of a coda, like if you're composing a piece of music, it's like the difference between devising like a melody through like improvisation and experimentation versus like hearing something in your head and kind of transcribing it. Like personally, for me, it was always the former, almost always. But I have experienced the latter, and it's kind of like, it's great when it goes well, it's incredible. I think it's what people like talk about when they say that they're kind of possessed by a muse. But when it goes bad, like when it becomes rote and kind of like dry, like I think everyone has had that experience where your favorite band just like puts out one too many. That's fine, I don't have anything else. I can put this back though. I think everyone's had that experience where like your favorite band, puts out one too many albums, and it's just so obvious they're just going through the motions. And I feel like that's kind of the opposite of kind of discovery. It's kind of like you have something in your head and you just put it out there rather than kind of being receptive to the possibilities and kind of putting something that you don't totally understand into the world. And I wouldn't assume to speak for authors because I'm definitely not a writer, but I feel like this is something that novelists talk about a lot too, like almost to the point where it's a cliche, like the idea that you can be just surprised by the direction your plot takes, like you're not in control of the things your characters say and do, like kind of being a conduit rather than like just kind of thinking, oh, here's what happens and here's what should happen next and just laying it all down. It's something like Grant Morrison and Alan Moore kind of talk about too. They take this idea even like further and talk about this like weird feedback loop between like the audience and the author that occurs when like myths like kind of evolve over time. Like obviously those guys are both like kind of comic writers. Like so they work with like creations that people have they didn't create. They're kind of just handed down and have been around for decades. So yeah, I guess their point there is that like the idea of Batman or like Odysseus kind of has a life of its own and kind of exists outside of the author's mind as much as it does within it. So yeah, that's all I got. That's why I like to make the kind of games I like, I guess. So I guess I don't know how much should we just talk now, Andy, or should we talk about the?
Do you want to show the game first, or do you want to just transition and then mess with it while we're talking?
Yeah, let's do that.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
The first thing that is interesting for me is you started your talk by saying that you started a transition from comics to music to games, and it sounded like you had not found something sustainable.
I'm not claiming I have now.
You've been doing this for how long? 6 years,
yeah,
you said?
Just about.
So how did that suddenly become a sustainable thing?
Because I got a job. I mean, I basically, like, it wasn't at first. Like, I was living in Pittsburgh, like I said, and I don't know if, so there's this weird kind of notorious like row of houses in Pittsburgh that are kind of mysterious like squat houses where they're very well maintained. They have electricity and internet and just kind of handed down from students. And like I have some friends that went to CMU and then they ended up in this house where they weren't paying rent, which is great. So I moved there and tried to make a go at it making music. So that wasn't sustainable. It turned out, even though I was living in Pittsburgh, which is super cheap, there's also no work there, and our label wasn't going so well. So I moved to New York and got a job. So basically, what that did is like let me have like a year to kind of like learn how to code, basically, and like learn PHP. And so I started doing web development on the side. And
You did that in New York, or
I did it in Pittsburgh and then New York.
Okay.
But then I got this job at the studio I mentioned, which was very helpful. Also, I was there full time for a couple of years. Now I'm part time.
This is Pop.
Yeah.
And do you still freelance there? Or?
Yeah.
Okay. So basically, because what I'm getting to is like the things that you're doing are still not. They can't exclusively. Well, not yet. We'll get to that. We'll get to that. We'll get to that later. But right now, I'm still more interested in the other stuff. So you also mentioned that games and music have an element of discovery. Now, what I find most interesting about that is like, do you differentiate between you as the designer or you as the player or listener?
I think it's true in either case.
Do you not think that there's like, I don't know, I guess what I'm getting to is like whether there's like a fundamental difference in the nature of exploration, of
for
creation.
The player or the designer?
Yeah. Or would you say those are identical things?
No, I mean, I think there's a fundamental difference, but you're still kind of exploring the same thing. I think obviously you have more power as a designer. You're kind of setting up everything and kind of experimenting. But I think like in the most interesting cases, you don't understand what you're creating, like when you're making a game, and you put it out there before you fully understand it, or it's like something that's so kind of complicated and kind of can go so many different places that it's kind of asking too much for any single person to completely understand it. Like, I mean, that's why it's like kind of a cliche at this point also that like when you say you've been beaten at your own game, like that's almost like a point of pride for a lot of game designers. Like you want to be able to have people be better at you at your thing.
It's interesting you mentioned that because this very similar statement came from William Gibson when he talked about Neuromancer. So which is of course an art form that you entirely dismissed in your presentation.
I thought the last thing I said was about.
I'm just giving you a hard time. No, but it seems to be that if you're deeply involved in your creation, then ideally for you as the creator, you might not know where it's going.
Right.
Or generally don't know where it's going.
Yes.
So would you therefore say that you're more interested in systems-heavy games?
I don't really know what systems heavy means, I guess.
Well, let's say if I said to you today you should make either a fighting, say you had the choice, make a fighting game or a point-and-click adventure.
I'd like to make another fighting game, so yeah, I mean, I guess I'd say that. I mean,
guess
but
what I'm getting to is that a lot of people differentiate between. So there was this interview with Ken Levine from the BioShock Infinite creative director, who said that he likes making story-based games, but that he doesn't actually ever play story-based games, and that he very much loves board games and XCOM and all that super strategy-heavy tactics stuff. Like where are you? And then this came up in a conversation the other day. So where are
Steve
you?
Gaynor said the same thing on Another Castle, the podcast I recorded with Charles Pratt.
You used to record with Charles Pratt.
Well, we may record again. But yeah, he said the same thing. Like he they love creating these like worlds that you kind of pick up and like uncover like things about the people who may have lived in this like fictional world. But then at the same time, like he gets really hyped up about like the possibility of players breaking the rules of the world and kind of like taking shortcuts and discovering things that they didn't program in there. It's like that kind of weird conflict. I think you see with like him and like that whole studio too, actually. Well, that he kind of came out of the tradition of like
kind of like everything that I've heard Alexander Bruce tweet about the last couple of days. So that's the guy who made Antichamber, which is like making him a bunch of money right now on Steam. Is that he loves watching speedruns. That's what he's been doing the last couple of days. He's been watching people speedrun his game and break it in numerous ways that he never intended.
I would argue Charlie should have done that before releasing the game. Maybe he did, but that does sound like a lot of fun.
Tried speedrun?
Yeah, letting people try to break it.
It's been around. That game's he's been if he hasn't sent you a build, then you're one of the few people he's not bugged with please play my game. Oh no, trust me, he's been chopping it around a lot. But yeah, no, that game is actually not a very systems heavy game, but clearly I never thought it was. I felt it was an experience. You go through a space, non-Euclidean geometry, and you're going through this like abstract rendered world. But I never considered it to be systems heavy. But now that I'm hearing that people are breaking it in numerous ways,
I don't know if break things in different ways though. Like a lot of these like Super Mario Brothers speedruns are just about like knowing like super weird details about the system. Like there's this like 12 frame. I was just reading about this yesterday and was looking up info about that guy Alexander. There's this like 12 frame like kind of window of like where the game will accept inputs, and it's just like from when you power it on, it just starts this thing, and whether you pause it or you go to a menu or you restart, like it's always like it's just on this weird timer that you never can reset. And like that's how people get faster times in Super Mario Bros. At this point. It's like by syncing up that window with times they need to do things. And I wouldn't say that that's like a system property of the game. It's just they know it so well that they can kind of exploit these weird little quirks about the metronome that makes it tick. So I don't know if.
Have you ever read the book of the guy who tried to get the high score in Breakout?
Yeah.
What's the name of that again? God, I'm really blanking on it right now. Does anyone know? It's like 150 pages. It's really amazing. There's a PDF online because it's impossible to buy. God.
Good question. Yeah, I don't remember.
Help me out. We'll figure it out later.
It's a demented book, though. This guy kind of goes a little bit mad, maybe. Like he's an older guy. Like I think he kind of just bought Breakout to like figure out what the big deal about this video game was, right? And he completely gets sucked down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, no, he went so far that he went to Atari. They granted him an audience. Like he was allowed to come in and ask questions about how the game was coded on the lowest level, right? Like he tried to figure out exactly on the bar where the discrete steps were that the ball would bounce in different angles, because there were 5. It turns out there were exactly 5. It wasn't like trying to always. So if you hit the ball here, it would bounce farther to the right and stuff like that. I guess that's the level of detail that you're talking about when you're talking about these like deep explorations of speedruns.
Yeah, I don't know if that's exactly the same thing. I mean, I wouldn't. Yeah, I guess I wouldn't consider Breakout a system-heavy game, though.
Probably not.
So.
Well, we got to this because I was wondering whether I was wondering whether you were more interested in system-heavy games as a creator.
I mean, I guess
whether
I am.
you differentiate between these things. Like how do you like?
Not inherently. I kind of think like if you can do something elegantly with this, like the thing that I'm interested in is like the relationship between the player and the game, right? Like if it creates like an interesting community of people, or like something like Street Fighter again, where you can sustain just like people playing it for a long time without like shutting down. That's interesting to me. I wouldn't say Street Fighter 2 is like a system-heavy game, but it creates like really rich and like interesting kind of play.
Oh God, that's so hard. Wait, so it's deep, but it's not system heavy. So the depth comes from the fact that people are exploring it continuously. So there must be.
I don't think depth is a process is a function of like the amount of systems you pile into something, right? Like,
well, no.
Like Go. So would you consider like chess a systems heavy game or Go?
I don't even know what that means right now.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to get at. I guess I don't really know either. I would say, yeah, David, I was wondering if we were going to get to that.
I wasn't even going to go there, but yeah, I was actually just involved in like another Doug Wilson, Andy Nealon thing. Yeah, so were you. So were you. Okay, great. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I think there's a difference between something that you play more linearly with few choices than something that you play where you have a lot of choices, or that's something that spans into a large possibility space. Right? You mentioned the frequency of notes, right, on different instruments. That's, in theory, that's an infinite continuum of possibility that you can explore, right? So that's I think what I was trying to get to with something that has like a larger possibility space of you interacting.
Okay, so maybe here's another analogy then. Like I think like serialism, like atonal music. Are you familiar with this?
Not overly, no.
So basically, it's like this idea that you take the 12 notes, like in a Western scale, and you to kind of get away of this idea of like what I was talking about, like the octave and like the kind of universality of the octave. This guy, I'm blanking on the name of the composer. I think it was Webern maybe, but he wanted to get away from this like what he thought was like this like very like strict kind of like he felt like he was kind of being controlled by the octave, and he didn't want to write like melodic music. He was like kind of like revolutionary. And he wanted to like make his own system just to prove that you could make music in other ways, and you didn't have to do the same thing that people in history had been doing. So he invented this thing called like serialism, where like the idea is like you take every note, and for every like phrase or bar, you have the same distribution of every note. So like a C has the same frequency as D, and then not the same frequency. That's confusing. The same number of instances of that note appearing. And I guess like the art in that kind of comes into how you choose your rows, like your tone rows they called them, and how you make the rhythm of each one come out. But because every note has the exact same distribution, you don't get these like sense of like release and the sense of like melodies you can kind of like listen to and kind of predict and understand, and it becomes this like giant kind of cluster that was really interesting for a little while. And for a little while, like if you weren't making atonal music as like an academic, you were basically considered a joke. But the music didn't go anywhere, and it was like now it's basically forgotten. Like nobody even knows what I'm talking about right now, probably, which is weird. But that's like a systems-heavy kind of approach to music composition that ignores like what I think is actually really interesting about music, which is like this universal property of like the relationship between these two notes. And I guess I understand why someone wanted to experiment with that, because it is an interesting experiment. But I guess I think it failed. That was kind of a tangent. I think we were talking about it.
I can pull it back, I think. Let's see. Well, I mean, what you're describing is, in a way, as a creator of a game, you're creating a thing that people can explore and figure out, and they could do something like that in it. Right? They could use it. Like a speedrunner is clearly using the game in a different way than it was maybe intended to be used.
Sure.
Right? The same way what you're describing as like a systems-heavy approach to music creation, maybe not the way the person who made the instruments thought it would work out.
It's almost like it's like an approach to composition that's like more theoretical rather than like human almost, or like visceral. Like it's literally like people would be rolling dice and like saying, okay, I'm going to use this note now, and then they'll use this note, and I can't use this one because I already used it 2 notes ago, so I'm going to use this one instead. And I wouldn't want to make any games like that where it's just like so, I don't know.
Dice fessy.
You're like so like systemic for the sake of being systemic, right? Like it's there to like serve, like the game is there to serve like the people that are playing it, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
Like what I like is like what happens when the people sit down in front of the thing and kind of lose themselves in it, or it's fun to watch. It's fun is a bad word, but you know what I mean. I'm not interested in like rules for the sake of rules, I guess. But I do think they're like really important.
Okay, that's a good point. That's actually a good transition. So most people here have at least seen BaraBariBall. Right, if it's not all have played it. That to me feels like a fighting game version of where you did not add anything for the sake of adding it. That was always my impression. Can you say something about how you came to like the parameters, 3 characters, 1 basic attack, how that evolved? Can you speak a little bit about that?
Well, so BaraBariBall was commissioned by NYU for no quarter in 2012, which is like this annual. They commission a bunch of games from a couple designers and put them in this big room, and then they have a bunch of people come and play them and get wine and beer and stuff, and it's a lot of fun. But so a lot of it was like I had to make this game pretty quickly. Like But I was lucky enough to like have the support of NYU to like get a lot of playtesting done, which is great. Like you could bring it there, and there's always students around, and people who run the program are really helpful, and a lot of people in this room, obviously. So a lot of it was like I was lucky enough to take it out of like a lot of the ideas in that game like kind of evolved from playtesting, which is not something that you always have the luxury of doing, at least in my experience.
How long was the time frame from like commission to the Game Center version, or the no quarter version?
Was probably like, I don't know, maybe like 8 months. It was a fairly long time, but you know, it's like a weekends kind of project since I was working full time at that time. But
you had already been working on something that was like a toy version of Super Smash Bros. Smash Brothers, right?
Yeah, the first like super early. Oh, you know, I wanted to bring that actually. That would have been fun. But yeah, the super early version was made it like
because I remember you showed it to us at Zach's place. Like you had something.
We played it in Toronto when Ramiro and I and Matt went up for Hand-Eye Society, and we showed off Hokra, and we had the Canadians versus Americans, where we lost. But
lost in your own game.
But yeah, I mean, it was so much. They had a super early version that we were like jamming on there at
that was in the summer of 2011.
Yeah, and like I think maybe August. But
and no quarter was May 2012.
No quarter was May of the next year.
Okay, so you're saying
a good amount of time,
so you're saying that the time constraint was what led you to it, and you would have otherwise had loaded it with like 20 characters and 50 attacks?
I'd like to add more characters, but no, more that like a lot of the elements, like the jumps that rotate around the players, is kind of like came from people not being able to see the HUD and just having like the opportunity to experiment.
The jumps weren't there in the no quarter version, were they?
No, they were.
They were? The rotating jumps?
Yep.
Wow.
But I was lucky enough to just like be able to observe enough people playing and say like, okay, like 40% of the people like don't see this thing in the HUD that's like extremely important. So we've got to like find a better solution. And, like stuff like the controls, just like having the opportunity to watch people play. And
my biggest bummer was that I couldn't catch you had to press the button in like the exact right moment to catch the ball.
That was a controversial change.
I was really happy. I was really happy when you changed it. Is it totally auto grab now?
Yeah. Within
a certain range?
Mm-hmm.
How big? Like twice the radius of the character, something like that?
No, it's like
few pixels.
Characters have like a bounding box that like determines what they can collide with, like in the physical world, like in the other players, and it's about this. It's basically the shape of their body, but as a rectangle.
I have like a million more questions about this, but I'm going to try to wrap it up pretty soon. Bounding boxes is a good topic. How many? So I watched a few. I used to play Street Fighter 4, as you know.
Of course.
Badly. Actually, I think I was kind of giving you a run for your money every now and then. So the way this always worked is like I'd win the first 2 games, and then he'd figure out that I'm bad at the game, and then just destroy me for the rest of the evening. But I watched this video where they showed the different hitboxes.
Should we look at the hitboxes?
Do you want to show the hitboxes?
Yeah, I wanted to show off some debug tools.
You can answer the question first. Like I just remember there were for like all the different modes and attacks. There were hitboxes for the attack. There were hitboxes for the same animation, but that would be the boxes that would be the boxes for the other player.
Right.
So there were like multiple sets of hitboxes for grabbing, throwing, kicking, whatever. Did you somewhat adhere to that philosophy, or did you just say, whatever, I'm doing a hit, there's gonna be this one hitbox?
Well, I mean, that's actually an interesting thing is like, it's kind of a chicken and the egg problem. Like, what is it, even just what, so yeah, to answer your question, yeah, there's like in BaraBariBall, there's a hitbox and an attack box. There's like, those are my terminology, like different games call them different things, but basically the hitbox is the shape of the thing that if you collide with the other player, then they'll like get hit. And sorry, I screwed it up already. The attack box is the thing that if the other player touches it, they'll get hit. The hitbox is the part of you that if you get touched by an attack, you'll get hit. And both of them change all the time, like when you do a different move, or even when you jump or like crouch, or if you run.
Right, but you only have attack boxes and hit boxes.
There's a bounding box, which is what I was just talking about, which determines like where you can be in the world. It's like if you run into a wall, when the bounding box touches the wall, then that's when you stop.
That's not the same as the.
No, that's actually talking about not even just fighting games, but platform games in general. Like using your vulnerability box, the hitbox, as your like bounding thing is like a super common issue. And the reason you don't do that,
it's a bad idea. It's a bad thing if you do it, right?
Yeah, well, it's a very like common problem. Like everyone's first game, like that's how it works. And it's part of the reason why I think 2D platformer games are not as easy to make as they look, because what happens is like you'll have a little guy running, and you'll run into a wall, and then he'll keep running, and he'll stick his foot out, and now like the foot is in the wall because he's got this like new part of these new pixels that just appeared as part of the animation, but they just like appeared inside of this wall, and that can cause all these problems that you don't anticipate. So that's why people generally like either make their sprites like completely rectangular, which looks kind of ugly, or like separate these two functions. But
Did you ever see Adam's postmortem on Cannibal?
Yes.
Adam Saltzman.
Yeah.
So he had a postmortem where that bounding the collision box for the platformer elements of his character are skewed towards the running direction. Right. So basically, the bounding box, if the character is here and this is the running direction, the actual hitbox is here, because you need to be able to walk off of a ledge without being punished and falling into the abyss immediately. So you still have a grace period.
Interesting. So no, it's more like they trail you then. They're not in front of you.
Yeah, right. It trails you. Like your hitbox, your collision box for the environment trails you a little bit.
Yeah, I have the same. Well, actually, in this game, I guess that's not an issue. But that's actually also another. Even not so much in Cannibal because you can't like air jump in Cannibal, but in games where you can like double jump, like that moment where like you walk off an edge and you suddenly go from like running to like floating. Like what you do in that moment, like determines what if your double jump like feels good or not, like very heavily.
I'm sure John Blow wrote about that extensively when he was making Braid too.
But there's no double jump in Braid.
There's no double. Well, it was just like about the idea that you have if you just do the one-to-one mapping.
Yeah, you don't want to do
that you get all kinds of like, oh damn it, I just fell. Like you just get a bunch of frustration, and the players have no idea, and the creators, if they don't know about the hitboxes, have no idea.
I really liked, speaking of Jonathan Blow, his talk about like how he did the character art for Braid. It's maybe one of the more useful things I think I've ever heard him say is like how, look at Super Mario Brothers again, the bottom of Mario is always a straight line. Like you can kind of draw a line with your eyes and it's like super obvious like where this thing is gonna hit when he jumps on a block or a monster or whatever. And so, he did the same thing with Braid. Like you made sure the guy's feet like are always in such a way that like your eye can like see this line. And it's a little thing. But
they had a huge issue when they made the transition from his prototype to David Hellman's beautiful art, right? Because suddenly there was no longer that perfect delineation.
Oh, maybe that's why he decided to talk about it, because he had to like rediscover that thing that was missing.
There were a bunch of things like that.
Yeah.
Like color was an issue and all that other stuff. Okay, one more. Divekick. Did you play Divekick?
I love Divekick.
Okay, can you talk a little bit about how you would? So Divekick, for those of you who don't know it, is a 2-button fighting game that started as a parody and is now going to be a published game on PS3, Vita, and PC. And maybe you can say something more about that.
Yeah, it's actually literally like a 2-button game. Like the controller that I played it on is just like it's like a box with just 2 buttons, and you just kind of go like this. It's not like there's a D-pad and 2 buttons. It's literally just 2 buttons. And yeah, so I played it at EVO last year. EVO is like a big Street Fighter tournament in Las Vegas, and they had this like booth with a bunch of games last year. And so BaraBariBall was there, and Nidhogg was there, and Divekick. I was lucky enough to get set up next to Divekick, and the guy came over, introduced himself, and we played each other's games a bunch. But so yeah, the way it works is like one button is, they call it dive, but it's basically jump, and they call it, and then there's kick. And so what you do is it's just 2 people facing each other. Like it just looks like a stereotypical fighting game. But you press one button, you jump, and you press the other button to kick, and the guy kind of like dives at an angle.
And the jump is straight up?
Jump is straight up.
But the dive kick,
dives at an angle.
Yeah.
And every character has like different like jump speeds and like floatiness when they descend, and like different angles for their kick. And there's like some finesse, like you can kind of like rapid tap the jump button to like, I guess, I'm not sure exactly how it works, but like you kind of like push away from the other player. And characters have meter, so you can build up meter and you press both buttons, and then you change your properties of your dives and your kicks to be better. And it's super simple, but like what it does is it kind of becomes like about this like contest of like who can draw the better triangle. Because like you're tracing these triangles, like where one guy goes up and you decide when to like start your what do you call that side of a triangle?
Dive part?
The dive part of the triangle?
The dive part? The hypotenuse?
Yeah, the hypotenuse. So you choose when to do it, and
the or the hypotenuse?
Because there's nothing else the other player can do, except for jump or not jump or dive kick. It like becomes, and it's also just one hit, you're dead. Like the rounds are super fast. You just jump and you kick, and then whoever hits each other.
Oh, there's not even a life bar?
There's a life bar, but it just completely depletes whenever you hit. So what it does though is it's like, because your options are so limited, and because basically because your options are so limited, every round of dive kick is like the last like 10 seconds of like an awesome Street Fighter match where like you both have like no health and you're both like, the next fireball is going to end it, and I know you're just going to keep throwing these fireballs because why would you get close to me? And I know that you're going to keep throwing those fireballs, and it's just like it just gets that feeling like it just makes it happen like right away when it's awesome.
You should sell this. You should help them sell this game. You're totally doing it right now.
The guy who's making that game is an editor at Shoryuken, which is like the biggest Street Fighter.
Isn't he like the editor at Shoryuken? He is, right?
He's the editor?
Yeah, he's like the editor.
All right, well, they don't need my help.
Okay, I do have one more because it's actually.
Wait, there was one thing I wanted to say about Divekick also, which is that they do this thing where, so basically it was huge. Like it got so much more attention than any of the other, like BaraBariBall and Nidhogg and Aztez and like I forget the name of the other game, Super Punch something. Like by like a factor of like 10. It was like constantly, there were people playing it constantly. They charged $1 per play. So it also like felt like the stakes were real, which is something that's missing from a lot of games now. So it kind of created that like kind of arcade feeling. And they, it was like winner stays on, and the person who won the most consecutive rounds like got placed into this tournament for later in the at the conference. And so basically, if you got shut out, if you lose 5 rounds in a row without taking 1 round from your opponent, there's this like big flashing thing that happens on the screen. So okay, sorry, if you take 4 rounds from the opponent and they haven't taken any yet, you get this fraud alert warning that appears in the HUD, and it's like this siren. It's like fraud alert. And then if you manage to take the next round without the opponent getting one from you, it goes crazy, and then the Keats will come by with his stamp, and he'll stamp the other person on their hands, like labeling them as a fraud. It's all in good fun. Like people their feelings don't get hurt really. Maybe some people did, but it's all, the whole experience is like really silly and kind of awesome, and the crowd like loves it, and the players like really like that moment where you have to like defend yourself from becoming labeled as a fraud is like extremely tense and just really great. So I really I think that game is going to go places and they know how to like create like a space to like for people to play games. They understand what it means, and like how to like drive it. It's really
It's not
fun.
an official selection at Evo 2013, is it?
No, it was part of the poll on Facebook to determine which of the games would get voted for the breast cancer thing.
Which one? Do you know?
Which one?
Which one got? Did they already have the vote?
Yeah, it ended last week. It was Melee.
Okay. Okay, last one. That's an interesting transition again because that game was originally a Kickstarter, right? Or not originally, but at some point they put up a Kickstarter.
And then they canceled it.
And then they canceled it because they went with a publisher.
Right.
So you guys did a Kickstarter.
We did a Kickstarter.
And that was Johann Sebastian Joust, Pole Riders, Hokra, and BaraBariBall. Can you just so we can get to the audience, can we briefly talk about how that fairly unusual combination of games?
Yeah, well,
like that doesn't feel immediately like, oh yeah, of course those 4.
Yeah, at this point it feels immediate to me, but I've just been immersed in it for so long that so yeah, I mean the thing that all the games have in common is that they're all like local multiplayer games. They all like kind of fit in the kind of arcade setting, and they're all like just as much about kind of like spectatorship as they are about the game themselves. And it was so this is something that Doug and Ramiro, the Joust and Hokra creators, kind of organized initially, and they pulled Bennett, the Super Pole Riders, also creator of QWOP, and myself into it. And the idea is it's partially because like these games feel like they belong together. They kind of create similar experiences, and they kind of I think we all kind of are working in similar ways, and partially just out of necessity. Like there's not really any place for a game like Hokra to go. Or a game like BaraBariBall to go, like these games that don't have any real single player experience, and they don't have any online multiplayer. They're not especially breathtaking to look at, so they don't really draw the attention of the average gamer, I guess. So I guess our idea was we put them all together and maybe get some more attention that way. And I guess it worked. We did a Kickstarter, which somehow managed to succeed, and now we're working the games to PSN first, and then PC and OS X.
Can you give us any information about what your timeline for that is, or is that all under, you don't know yet when it's done?
Our goal is before the end of the year, like this fall, but it's too soon to really know.
Okay, that's it from my side. I'm gonna open it to the.
Thanks, Andy.
You got later. You guys are up. Who has a couple of questions for Noah? Someone here.
Which game out of the 4 games Kickstarter is going to cost the most to support? Like one guy sucking all the.
It might be me, or it might be Joust because of the hardware requirements. Like getting Bluetooth stuff to work with Windows is pretty tricky, so we'll see.
I was wondering if you differentiated between game rules for the picture details and things. So like a 12-frame window of input for Aria. That to me feels more like a picture detail as opposed to like sitting around inside that sort of space. But it still becomes part of the system that you expect.
Yeah.
So I was wondering where you know if you
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess I would agree. But obviously, like any property of the system, like kind of becomes a rule when you get to it. Um, I mean, it's just a matter of how you think about it, I guess. Like you can kind of like take that micro view and be like, you know, all these aspects of the hardware, and you know, they kind of bang up against these like more formal rules, like in these interesting ways. Then you can also like kind of step back and zoom out and say like, well, here's the rules of Super Mario Brothers, and we can ignore this stuff because we're not speedrunning and we don't really care. So yeah, it's all the same thing, but I think you just kind of have to determine what angle you want to look at it.
I got way more stuff if people don't have questions. I can keep on going forever.
Look at hitboxes.
Yeah.
You have kind of an interesting angle on games, like real theoretical, and you talked about the music theory, and you obviously think about this like, really in depth.
I'm glad you think it's theoretical instead of like new agey. That's what I was worried
about. The game that you have now is like a mainstream genre, the fighting genre. Do you feel confined at all? You were talking about the musician who didn't want to use the normal octave range,
Sure.
So he wanted to make his own. Like you're still using the fighting genre. Do you feel contained by that?
No, I mean I think that guy screwed up. Like I think like serial music was like an experiment that was a failure. So I don't know. I mean I like working in genres. Like I'm interested in like it's a big. You get. I mean since I guess what I'm interested in is like the player's experience with the game as much as like the game itself. You get a lot from working within a genre because people make assumptions that you can take advantage of and not have to worry about teaching. Like I think tutorials are like they're boring to play through, but they're like super boring to make. So like if you can avoid, it's like trying to avoid stuff like that is really important.
Extremely hard to make.
Yeah,
It's like,
hard things tend to be boring. No, I'm just kidding. So yeah, so not really. I mean, I don't mind. I feel like there's ways to do what you want to do without making something that's like explicitly experimental. Not that I really mind.
How many other fighting ball games are there? That are like Smash Brothers, but where the actual thing is just score by putting a ball in someone
probably none. Like there's a mod. There's a I don't know what you would call this. Like Doug would know if he was here, but like basically a way that people play Smash Brothers that I learned about after making this game, where they take like a training mode or something, and they spawn like a sandbag, which is like basically like a character that can't move. Like it has the same properties as a character, where if you beat up on it, it'll get lighter, it'll take damage, and they put it in the middle of the course, and they basically like play BaraBariBall. They like knock it over, and the team that gets it to like ring out on their side of the map gets a point. But it's all like they keep track on a piece of paper, and it's all kind of just a style of playing the game rather than that's supported part of the engine. But so I guess there's precedent, I guess. I didn't know about it until I showed the game to some like Smash pros, though.
I was just going to ask you if that was an inspiration, but that you just answered the question. Okay.
Actually, Tekken has a ball game too. Yeah,
like
Tekken.
In a Tekken?
Yeah. I've never played it. I don't really know anything about those two games. I don't know every fighting game or anything, so I should probably look into those. There's like, yeah.
Are you interested in developing like 3D games, or do you want to?
I mean, at the moment, I kind of have to work. Yeah, if I had the resources, I'm not one of those people that would like always. I think it's great to like work alone and have like complete control, but like I also like working in a team. Like I've worked in teams a lot, and if it's with the right people on the right project, it can be really great. So yeah, I have nothing opposed to doing a 3D thing. It's just a matter of like resources, which I don't have.
Question about the sound. I remember playing BaraBariBall with people who hadn't played it before, and afterwards talking about it, and they didn't notice it didn't have music. Because
That's interesting.
I really love the sound of the song.
Thanks.
Where that came from. Did you know the guy that came beforehand?
Yeah, it's a good friend of mine, a guy I went to elementary school with. he went to I'm blanking on the name of the city, but he spent like I think a summer in India, like studying tabla, and he came home with a cool set of tablas. And kind of like the visual style of the game was always like very kind of not like really referencing any country in particular, but kind of like inspired like in Southeast Asia or like South Asia kind of like art and colors and stuff. So it was kind of a perfect fit. And it's like, it's a great sound effect. Like it's so like percussive, you can hear it across the room. It's something Ramiro talked about with Hokra too that always stuck with me. Like I think the steel sound effect, like it just like pierces through a room of like drunk people. Like you can hear it anywhere. It's like this really high pitched thing. And like the sound, I tried to do the same thing with the sounds here. But I think there's a lot of work to go to do there still. Like there's a lot of like in-game kind of events that are kind of interesting and that could be called out by unique sounds that'll make the thing sound better and also like more useful for the players. So hopefully that'll continue to develop. It almost has like the same kind of like simplicity and like purity of like chiptune music or like 8-bit kind of sounds, which I don't really like so much, but like they're so simple. It's just like one kind of pitch and maybe some overtones. It's like the tabla's kind of the same way, except it's like from an analog source. So I don't know. It's useful in the same way, I guess.
Did you ever actually try playing Mario in like the abstracted version with just the,
Well,
just the squares?
Does that exist?
Oh yeah, of course. There are a bunch of ROM hacks.
No, I probably should.
Oh no, you can get a ROM hack that just does pretty much what you do. Oh, you just mocked that up in Photoshop?
Yeah.
Okay, so
that would have been better. I should have.
So I used the image of the actual ROM hack in class, and actually those I think are.
Oh, wow.
I'm going to use it in class tomorrow.
I should have gotten that from you.
They did a bunch of ROM hacks. They did ROM hacks to just. Have you played Shadow Mario? They just took everything and made it like just 2 colors.
That sounds.
So that as soon as the Goomba runs behind a bush, you can't see it anymore.
Oh, like subspace.
I don't know what that is.
Super Mario Brothers 2.
Oh, okay.
So that's a weird case because that's like, if you can't tell the difference between a normal block and like a block with something
Oh no,
inside.
it's the Shadow Mario is a nightmare.
Yeah. But the rules are all there, but I guess you don't have enough information to determine.
Right. But playing
knowledge
like
you
so,
need.
I've played the ROM hack of just the one that looks like Mario and it's fully playable. It's just that makes the sprite blocky. It's the same game.
Yeah.
Like it feels the same. It sounds the same. Like all the physics, the controls. I mean, the quality that makes that game live up to this day are in my opinion, the physics and the controls.
Absolutely.
Right. Which go hand in hand with the level design. But anyway, it's not my turn.
So Noah,
Oh.
this game's you've been working on this one for a while. Like, what's next? You got another game in the queue you're thinking about, or?
I don't know. There's still so much left to do here. I mean, I've got to.
In terms of getting it out to the world?
Yeah, mostly that.
Finding the game.
I mean, there's definitely stuff I'd like to add, and refine, but like it's at the point where they've got to get the port started, so it's probably better to not overload the programmer with lots of last-minute changes.
That's a big focus right now. Just
Yeah.
keep an eye on the development, make sure it gets to where it needs to go.
Yeah, and there's stuff we have to do for sports friends in general, like a lot of traveling, which, I don't know. I mean, I'd love to start something new, but I haven't had enough time yet, or time to really even start thinking about it, which is kind of frustrating. It's not fun to work on the same thing for that long.
I think we all have that problem.
Yeah, but it's nice to have something that people care about, so it's good to have the opportunity to at least develop it and try to get it out to people.
Well, I think you can claim that. So I can just tell you from anecdotal evidence that there's no way my girlfriend would ever play a fighting game. She totally loves BaraBariBall, and I don't know if it's because she likes you, but I don't think it is. I think she likes the sound, and she likes it. She actually lost. Like, she lost terribly, but she still enjoyed the experience of playing it. Like, she felt that it was fun. She wanted to, like, we went away from where it was being played, and she wanted to go back to play it. She asked me to go back to play it. So I always wonder how that happens.
I mean, I feel like it's part of the same thing as I mean, in cases like that, like it's like you're talking about with Mario, like the controls are tuned in a way that's just like pleasant to kind of experience. Like I feel like there's like certain games like Tetris and like Smash Brothers maybe also where if you play it for a long time, I always say this, but like you play it for a long time and you go to sleep and then you close your eyes and you see like the things happening, like, moving. Yeah, like the paths of the things happening. So like that's like, I like to like try to create that feeling. And actually, I met someone somewhere a couple months ago that told me that he had a dream about the game, and that was like so satisfying. I was like, that's awesome. That's exactly what I'm going for. So maybe there's that.
Magic. Okay, so this is the name of the book we were talking about. It's
We
called
found it.
I found it. Yeah, it's called Pilgrim in the Microworld by David Sudnow, Sudnow. It's 150 pages. You'll read it in an afternoon, and you'll find the PDF somewhere. It's really hard to get as a hard copy.
It's kind of like what's that? Oh shoot,
Wow.
blanking on everything today. The movie by
Marvin Minsky commented on it.
what did he
It's
say?
the guy. He's like, in this worthy sequel to his tract on mastery of music craft. Okay.
Huh.
Sudnow once again explores lots of worlds at once. It may not show us how to coax the children home, but this book gives us good ideas of where they go. Okay. Mind you, this is a long time ago. Like video games, what's that?
It's good, just as like a kind of a descent into madness, like experience. Read someone's experiences, kind of losing themselves a little bit.
I know, this was around the same, I read this around the same time I was going deep on StarCraft 2, so it very much strongly resonated with me. I was like, it was the moment where I felt that quote, just playing single player games that were just over in a week or something, that did not stick with me because the stories are all horrible or terribly written. It just felt like a good thing to do, so reading that gave me a sense of maybe sometimes it makes sense to go deep on a game. The way we played Street Fighter 4 for about a year.
Sure. Well, I'm still playing Street Fighter 4, but
I kind of dropped off of that.
Yeah, and I mean, it kind of goes without saying that it's not a coincidence that it's Breakout that did this to him, right? Instead of like BioShock or I don't know, like Assassin's Creed 3. Like, I don't think we're going to be seeing books about people kind of losing themselves in those games and taking over their life for
No, because it needs
months.
to be a tractable space that's also interesting to explore.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not harping on AAA games. Like, I actually was thinking of getting Assassin's Creed 3 just to walk around the frontier. Like, I was like, I don't care about the game, but it looks really pretty, right? So I like that kind of exploration aspect.
Yeah, I don't mean to really pick on them either, but maybe sometimes I do.
But David Cage said they should, oh God, should go towards Hollywood, closer towards Hollywood. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, that was a weird one of his 9 points.
Oh God, so bad.
So I tend to like games kind of that don't have like strict rules just because I'm really bad at them. Like Street Fighter, I can't play it just because I'm really terrible at it. And like I have fun playing against somebody who's also terrible at it. But most people who play it are not actually really good. So it's like really no fun playing someone who's good at StarCraft or Street Fighter.
Yeah,
Good at it. So
of course.
I tend to like games that don't really have that many rules. Make me just fuck around and not do much. So like, do you think that that's like kind of restrictive to people to have like like, I don't know exactly what my question is, but I guess like a smaller subset of stricter rules would be more restrictive in a way for the general audience to enjoy versus
Well, I don't.
something that's like a music scale maybe or something that has like almost infinite combinations of possibilities.
Well, I mean, like a scale is only 8 notes, and there's games that have super simple rules that are super complicated. So I guess kind of like going back to the systemic, what did you call it? Heaviness. Systems heavy game. Like I don't think it's exactly a function of like the number of rules or anything, but I don't know. I mean, I don't. Yeah, I love a lot of games that are not, super like rich in the sense that I'm talking about. So I don't think it's restrictive, and they're fun to make. Like we made this game Hemp Tycoon that was on Adult Swim where it's basically like a Farmville parody where all there is really to do is kind of like optimize where you plant these seeds and then come back and pick them at the right time. But it was a lot of fun to make just because like I wrote all the text for the game and it was like kind of this like glimpse into this stupid world where like hemp is used to make like LCD like pixels and like jet fuel, and it was just, I don't know. It was a lot of fun. And I'm trying to think of an example like that I've been playing a lot recently, but there definitely are some. So yeah, I don't think they're restrictive to make or to play. I'm just kind of just making a case for a certain like type of game that I guess feels natural to me. It's kind of like my default like view on stuff, and it's not like I don't like other stuff, but it's just like this is like what my assumption just has always been. And I think that's where the music thing comes from. Is like I think that maybe that's why it's because like before I started thinking about games, I had all these like properties of music like drilled into me. if that makes sense.
Yeah, I guess I said number of rules because I couldn't figure out in my head what made games like StarCraft and Street Fighter 4 like unappealing to me. Like what it is about their set of rules that makes people like, be so fanatical about.
Do you play any multiplayer games?
You love chess, right?
I play like Counter-Strike.
So.
But that's like less of a rule-based game, I guess, in a way, in that it's like I can pick it up. I'm pretty good at Counter-Strike, but I had fun even when I was terrible at it. But like playing against good people, there's something about the visceral experience of playing it where you don't really need to win or be good. Like it's really not fun losing at Street Fighter 4.
I see. I actually like losing at Street Fighter 4.
Well, if you're good, but I feel like I don't know if you when you were starting out playing Street Fighter, if you played against people who were really good, and it's just like they beat you in like 2 seconds or a guard and all that.
I don't know. I never really minded it. I mean, when I was growing up, I didn't have a ton of opportunities to do that because, you know, I was a kid and arcades were expensive and there weren't even that many people there anyway. But like, it might just be a matter of taste because I'm terrible at Counter-Strike and I can't even like, I'm just like, it's like the opposite. It's like for you, for Street Fighter, it's like me and Counter-Strike. I'm just so bad and I just don't even enjoy loot. Like I don't know the maps. Like I feel like so maybe what like when you talk about the amount of rules in Street Fighter, it's like there's a lot of buttons and a lot of possibilities for combos and ways to make things happen. And like in StarCraft, there's so many units that like memorizing them is just such a chore. But it's like for Counter-Strike, like learning the maps is like so boring to me. Like I can't stand it. Like I feel like I would be okay at the game if everyone else didn't like have this like massive knowledge that like I don't have. So it's just a matter of taste, I guess.
But StarCraft is a good example because I really want like when StarCraft came out, I was really interested. Like, oh man, because I played StarCraft 1 like a little bit, and like, oh, StarCraft 2 was awesome, and I started playing it. When I started playing it, it was a lot of fun. But then like I realized that like you had like people were like memorizing build orders. It was like this really mechanical thing that you had to be good, and I was like, that's when I kind of lost interest.
But you play chess. Those are build orders. Openings are build orders.
But he knows those already.
Okay.
It's more fun.
Hey, wait. So you're just getting older and you can't like actually.
I mean that's totally legitimate. I mean I know I'm never gonna like break this certain barrier that I've probably already hit at like games that I love, but it's okay.
I feel I hit that barrier really fast, and they're like, yeah, okay. Any more questions? Okay, so in closing, when can we play your wonderful game and where? Well, you can play it here tonight.
Aside from right here.
Aside from right here.
Yeah, so that maybe you've heard of this festival called Indiecade East, which is happening.
Totally not prepared right now.
next weekend. So there's going to be a Sports Friends panel on Friday.
Wait, this is not the coming weekend. This is the.
Isn't it this coming? No, sorry, yeah, not this weekend, but the weekend after this weekend. So I don't know all the details, but on Friday the games are going to be set up somewhere at the Sports Friends panel.
And this is at the Museum
of the Moving Image in Astoria, Queens. And then I think on Friday there's something called Night Games, which may have BaraBariBall at. I haven't entirely figured that out yet. But
Robin are not running that?
Nick Fortuna is running it this time.
Okay.
So
for those of you who have never managed to make it over to California to Indiecade, this is the East version of that, which is being fully organized, I think, by Matt Parker, the poor guy. He's doing it all on his own. He'll be ecstatic if he has a good turnout, I'm pretty sure. Indiecade's always a lot of fun because of the people there and because of the night games and stuff like that. So I can fully recommend it.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of cool new stuff for this one too, like I forget what they're calling it, but like the talks that are about a speaker or two speakers like talking about a single game.
Right.
The one that Simon's
the
doing.
well played.
Yeah, the well played, right.
So there's their well played sessions. So yeah, what's the guy's name who made Cart Life? He's here. Richard Hofmeyer. Yeah, he's going to be here. I think he's pitted against Simon Ferrari. Well, pitted against whatever. Like there's a person who talks about the game, and ideally the creator is there.
Oh, I see.
And then then after the presentation by the person who played the game, they have a dialogue.
Gotcha.
Those are really fun to watch.
And Hokra will have one as well.
Really?
Yep. I think so.
Totally
or maybe that may be a different.
I may be
spreading
I think you're right.
misinformation.
I think you're right. I'm clearly not on top of this.
There's something going on with Kevin and Margaret talking about Hokra.
Nice. The two of them or both? Oh, cool. Should all come to Indiecade East.
Yeah, it's
but
awesome.
Thank you very much for this
Thanks,
insightful
Andy.
presentation.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, and thanks everyone for coming.